Hi, everybody. Welcome to UX Murder Mystery. I'm Eve Eden, and we have a special guest with us. So I'll let Brian tell you more about who she is.
Hey, I'm Brian Crowley, and we are happy to be joined by Carm McDonald. Carm McDonald is a design leader and has been an adjunct instructor with Illinois Tech, and also was an instructor with General Assembly.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New
New
Year. That's
Year.
right. Yes, it is the new year. All right. So we are, we're focused generally on, UX failures, product design. And with Carm, her specialty really is e-commerce. So we'd love to kind of dive into a product failure with Wish.com. We might dabble into other e-commerce. I know Brian has other experience with e-commerce. So do I. And so we'll kind of see where the conversation goes. So maybe overarching, Brian, anything you want to add to what we'll be talking about today?
Sure. So, I mean, the big thing that Eve and I have talked about throughout the show, and Carm, I would love to get your take on this, is really the need for moderation across so many platforms, and it appears as though the primary thing that has happened with Wish is Wish became the site that it didn't learn from eBay what eBay has learned for years, or what from Amazon has learned for years, which is a lot of these e-commerce sites they set up, and then people get in, they build shops, the shops promise a product, and they maybe have good photography, or they borrow from other products, and then when people get the products do not fulfill what the promise was of the site. And we have there's several articles from about the failure of Wish from Morning Consult and Britannica and Euro Consumers. And so I would love to talk about that problem.
Yeah, let's go for it. And I would preface that, even though I've been in e-commerce for a really long time, as Brian knows, I guess I would say that my expertise probably falls in that search realm.
Yeah.
Having been a search practitioner and just working like top of funnel. And so glad to dig in. And I'm going to be quite honest, you guys. I am not familiar. I'm familiar with wish.com, as we all are, but I am curious to dig into some of the failures that have come out of this.
The primary thing that I'm looking for, or I was looking at, and I found out, was a lot of the stuff with shipping time, which you and I are both familiar at, having worked at a e-commerce site that was competing with Amazon, and Amazon having like that next day prime delivery that everybody started to go to. So they were having a lot of people ordering, and then packages not showing up, or the wrong thing arriving, like ordering a dress and getting like a package of straws or something, some kind of like nonsense like that. And then the other side of it is the thing that I was talking about initially, that you and I, in our e-commerce experiences, we didn't deal with it, because these are more of the third party sellers, where it's like you have a third party seller that comes onto your platform to sell.
Yep.
And that's where you need moderation. Like, you need people to be able to like verify and go in and control.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I would say in a former life, like I've dealt with like these platforms that more so have like sellers. A particular platform that are actually doing the selling, and then they have the 1P, 2P, 3P shipping options. And so that's it could be a bit difficult to sort of coordinate across that, and how do you build transparency and fulfillment as a whole. Like, in the background, there's a lot that goes into that. But everyone has obviously nailed it. But they have the, I would say, the workforce behind them and the capital behind them to actually make that shipping work. Like they really hung their hat on reliability with shipping and they just took it next level. And now they are the gold star that every other platform or company is trying to live up to.
Yeah.
You know,
One thing I was mentioning, or Brian, we were mentioning before the call
Yeah.
too, is that, with Wish, you see these evaluations on companies going into like the $1 billion mark. So by 2015, Wish was like the fastest growing e-commerce app on earth, right? Facebook offered it like 20 million at one point. Amazon did too. I think it was like I think Amazon offered it 10 billion. I don't know if I'm reading this right. Alibaba matched it, right? And the founder, is it Zolewski, turned them all down. What he said is, "Hey, we're going to be bigger than Walmart." That was some of like what was happening around 2015. And so Wish had more installs than Amazon in 42 countries. It booked 2.5 billion in annual revenue. And obviously investors were kind of like into it. So I think with that, there was some of that hype that comes with, just what we see in our tech industry, what we see currently with our own roles, and this is like something we've been talking about with, other people on our podcast with our, the hype of, what tech can deliver, the products that, we can build. And then something happens, right? Like something kind of changes. There's like this burn rate or something where things just get stopped in their tracks. And I think this was where I think Brian and I were like, oh, Wish is like one of those product failures. Like what the hell happened here?
Yeah, and we're seeing like OpenAI valuation, which is like astronomical. Like it's like I think somebody said it's the most valuated, it's the highest valuated company ever in history. But like, so if we look at Wish as like an example of it, right? Wish valued itself at 14 billion, and then 2 years ago was sold for 173 million.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is quite a big difference.
Yeah, a huge gap, so to speak. And so, yeah, I guess the question is, to your point, Eve, like what happened? Where did it actually fail?
Yeah, and so a couple of those is the user experience. So we touched a little bit on shipping. A couple things that they're mentioning too, and us kind of being from e-commerce. I used to work at Sears. Brian, you were at CDW. I know you're
With
back
Carm.
at Carm. You're at e-commerce places as well. And so with that, some of they were mentioning is fulfillment, trust, experience. Some refunds took weeks or months, to get refunds back. There was counterfeit sellers and just things that were kind of almost like fake storefronts that people were building. So any of that kind of does that kind of ring a bell on like your experience has been, and what happened within like a business you've worked for that you've just helped build the user experience or change things around for the company?
I personally think when we look at like Wish, question for you guys. When we think about wish.com, like what are some other sites that are actually similar?
I mean, eBay is very similar. I mean, eBay is very similar in the pattern of there's a lot of shell game shit that goes on eBay. I feel like eBay has become, and Amazon too, they've become a little bit better about it. Um, both of them in terms of like you can contact, you can have like there are resolutions that they started to like scale up, but eBay is the one that like
I would
strikes
say
me as,
Carm Temu. Have you used Temu?
oh yeah,
So I
I
was,
use Emo.
yeah, I'm literally
Okay.
thinking that when I think about like wish.com and some other sites that have this like familiar footprint, right? I think about Temu. Timu, whatever the case may be, right? Right. I remember, Brian, when we were working together in e-commerce, like we even looked at like Alibaba, but it wasn't for aesthetic. It wasn't for UI. It was literally just to understand like the functionality and try to gauge like what principles they were using for what it was that they were trying to sell. What we did know is that they were selling to the masses. But my point in bringing this all up is I think that there is like a primary difference between like Western commerce and non-Western commerce.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even though Wish conceptually was I think it was born out of California. I think that's where the company may have originated from, but they built like a whole fulfillment model in Asia. So that's where the
Yep.
fulfillment and all of those things that actually lead to the delivery of the actual items, like they were sourcing all of the products from, another country, right? A non-Western country. And so I think it's just helpful to understand like the business model behind Western commerce versus a Temu or a Wish or an Alibaba, where they're selling items for cheap. And so there's a different, I think that there's a different thinking that goes into it. And so when we think about like Apples of the world and Amazons of the world, I think it was more that commerce was more intent focused for users, where Wish is all about like stimulation and wholesale products and getting more to you. And so I don't think that they were really thinking about regulatory things in place, because there's a business model that says sell, sell, sell. And so we're optimizing for business versus like user behavior and more so user success. I'm not going to say that folks like intended to like fraud people out. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm just thinking that business optimization probably took priority over user experience, right? It probably took priority over building, trust
Yep.
by the standards that we're accustomed to designing in.
That is such a excellent point for like that's not like thinking about like how because we do this in the US all the time where we centralize ourselves and center ourselves and don't think of like what the ecosystems are that you're building around it. And if you're building around it in Asian culture, there are differences from how the US perceives. So that is just you know, and there's also we just have to also mention this. There's also like knockoff culture is a big thing in Asian culture, from toys to video games to everything. I mean, I have there are some knockoffs that are probably in this room right now with me. But literally because they're mass produced and because they have the molds or the patterns, you can buy jackets, you can buy you name it, you can find a knockoff version, and that tends to you see that on eBay, you see it in all over the place. So that is just a fascinating point.
One thing that I wanted to mention too with Wish is that they mentioned this algorithm that their model similar to TikTok. People weren't searching on wish.com. What they were doing is they were scrolling. And so this kind of algorithm that they were delivering, this addictive behavior, was similar to what you see, you're on social media and all of a sudden, without you knowing it, you get into it. You get from like looking at images or videos to autoplay video, or you get into a scroll where now it takes over your entire screen and now you're scrolling. You don't really know that's happening. And that was something that Wish did. It was not about here, let's go into the search, field and, show you all the white shoes that you want. It was, let me, based on your behavior, let me show you other things that other people bought, for like $1 for, I don't know, like toothbrushes, or $2 dresses, or $5 for some, gadget or something.
Yep, I was going to say, Eve, you're exactly right. And so this was something that Brian and I used to experience a lot when we worked together. We worked at a company that was a brick and mortar company first. And so when we were practicing, UX as practitioners, there was always this conversation about mobile first, mobile first. And we used to get disgusted by it because it was like, how can you be mobile first when this, in fact, is not a mobile first company? But I think Wish, similar to TikTok and some of the other brands, their inception was mobile first. And so to your point, Eve, the feed becomes the storefront. And so in traditional e-commerce or Western e-commerce, the way that we've practiced it, we used to show like the number of results you had, and we used to have pagination, right? Where like if you go on like Shein and even Fashion Nova, you go into this like continuous discovery loop.
Right.
And that is the big difference between Western commerce versus non-Western commerce, is that like they've nailed the whole discovery, and they've nailed the whole the impulse economy, so to speak.
Would you say it's kind of like you're being entertained?
Yeah, I
Like
would.
you're shopping and you're being entertained, right? Like, I mean, we're not, it's kind of like a personalized shopping experience. Like, here's some coffee, here's some, I don't know what. And instead you're just like, it's like entertainment, but for shopping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Years ago, when just to we were we tested something that years ago where we were ahead of that loop, where we had tested unboxing videos on a product page. You remember that? Remember, we were going to try to get YouTube people to unbox, because we started to see a pattern of the users that would go and watch unboxing videos. And I remember that we tested it, and it did really well. It like blew up the numbers.
Yeah.
And that was but it's so interesting, because I like the I'd be curious to know from both of you, and especially Carm with your search background. I feel like search as a thing has gotten so much worse across the internet. And I feel, this is just me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I also feel as though Eve was mentioning like white sneakers, right? If you want like a white pair of Nikes or whatever, I feel as though it's become harder to just get directly to those white sneakers versus it is to like be entertained by 12 different influencers, and then maybe eventually you'll get to some kind of sneaker, but you're not going to get like to that. And I'd love to hear how you feel or how you see search within e-commerce here in 2026.
Yeah, I would say I recently did a talk for an ex-coworker of ours for their team. And so the talk that I delivered was basically just AI powered search, and like how we're going to see search sort of evolve. Now, AI is this big thing, right? Not that it wasn't, because we know people in Chicago who were talking about AI like decades ago before it took up your entire LinkedIn feed. But all that to say is that I think we're Baymard, when I was a search practitioner, Baymard had a list of like 12 to 14 query types. And this was over a decade ago, where there were 12 to 14 query types that were common across e-commerce sites. And even though they were common query types that we would see users put into search boxes, only maybe 40% of those query types did we even answer or get right or nail? Like there was a super small percentage of e-commerce sites that could fully grasp what the query was and give the accurate results. And so now in 2026, when I did this talk from queries to conversion and just thinking about how AI is powering search, Baymar has now reduced that list of query searches to like 8. So we've lost a few queries. They've somehow merged. But the important thing to know is that Baymart has discovered some additional query types that are starting to come up. And those include conversational queries, journey-based queries, and the social queries inspired by social media influencers and things like this. And so I think what's going to happen as we head into 2026 and we think more about AI and agentic shopping, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see search kind of merge with feeds because nobody's searching. And so I think it's all about these discovery journeys that like Wish and Temu, like technically they've nailed it. And even Shein, like literally I was on Shein not too long ago, but something that I noticed is that you can't enter a search query. And so let's say, for instance, you're entering, hey, just give me black dresses. And so you have this endless feed of black dresses. But then when you click on a black dress, you go in that product page, you're clicking in the black dress, you're looking at the sizes, you're like, hey, I'm going to add to cart. But at every touch point, there's another scrolling list of more black dresses. So you can click on this black dress and then you keep scrolling and they're like, hey, there's more black dresses like this. And so now you're in this like endless loop of more black dresses. And then you add it to cart. And then once you add to cart, there's like, hey, there's more black dresses where this came from. And so you're constantly in this discovery mode. And the reason why is because they want you to buy. This is like this whole idea of this like impulse economy where you're in this continuous loop of just like browsing and getting excited and adding to cart. And so I do question where Wish failed because Temu, Shein, Fashion Nova, a lot of these places that adopt these same sort of principles, they're not necessarily failing. So it has to be the fulfillment in that Wish didn't live up to. But in terms of like what we would consider by Western standards like a UX fail, it actually succeeds for its intent and purpose.
It sounds as though the fail that Wish, the ultimate fail that Wish has had from reading through it was mainly the fulfillment end, was mainly like, so you would go through and you'd be able to find your black dress, but when you got the black dress was not the dress that you wanted. It was something that fell apart, not as good, or didn't match the photos. I'm curious to know, do we feel like this is also an unsustainable model? Because I'm wondering if there's a pattern I know in my house, and I don't know if it's happening in other people's houses, where things get ordered and tried on and then returned. And I don't know if that is a large pattern. I guess that's not fast fashion, but that is a trend, right? Where people order things and try them on, and then it's the trunk club type fashion or trend.
Stitch Fits.
Yeah, and is that Stitch Fix too? Yeah. And is that like part of this? Does that happen with this within this ecosystem of the Temus and the Xians?
Yeah, you know what, Brian? I think that's a good question. I've shopped on both, if I'm going to be honest. And
Yeah.
again, if I'm keeping it honest, this is probably bad, but for the time it takes to return the stuff and what I paid for it, it's just not worth the investment unless they make it very, very simple or very, very easy to return those things. Otherwise, I don't. Yeah, I'll just keep it. Like if you pay $2.99 for like straws and you get spoons, hell, I'm keeping the spoons. $2.99. I'm not gonna send it back. But I think that's a really good point in terms of like, hey, are they losing out by having these fulfillment problems? And I wonder if like fulfillment as a whole and then reverse fulfillment in terms of returns. I am curious, what are the problems that exist there? And then they're like a wholesaler platform. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure like not having checks and balances in place to make sure that folks are getting the items that they actually wanted. Um, Maybe it's just too huge for them to control. Maybe it's something that kind of spiral out of control and they don't have a good grasp on it. And if I'm being honest, I don't necessarily know how fulfillment works in non-Western commerce. Maybe that's something we can dig into at a later time.
Well, and something that you just raised too that I think is such an interesting point is like we as UX practitioners, we tend to operate on one side of the funnel, and we don't usually have anything to do with the fulfillment end of it, but it can affect our experiences. And it's like what happens, it becomes a question of like what happens when you make a great experience, but then there's one piece in the customer journey that just botches everything.
I think that's a good call out. And this is something that no shade to the UX practitioners, right? No shade to our industry and to anyone who works in our industry. But I think you're right, Brian. And I think I've observed a lot of like this emphasis on like these end-to-end experiences. And is it truly end-to-end if designers are behind the scenes for a digital site, right? I remember like service design was this huge thing that shows like this on stage and backstage and off stage sort of journey, but really covering this like full end-to-end experience. And I think that UX as a practice, especially in commerce, like we've never really done that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a valid point, and can we truly say that we're delivering end-to-end experiences where there's a portion of the experience that we're not even understanding?
I do remember when I was at CDW, if you recall, I recall that, and this was not telling tales out of school too badly, but there was a team that had that was all in one section in the office, and they had never all gone 20 feet over to the fulfillment center, which was the other section of the office. And then we decided, let's go take a tour and let's like go walk through that and like let's go like understand what this thing is that we're making. And I just wonder how many companies have never gone and found, because you're right, like if they're offshoring, if they don't have, I don't even know if CDW still has that fulfillment center or not.
Yeah.
But you know, if they're offshoring, it's not. I think it's unlikely that they're going to take teams, which are now we know distributed, and like fly them to Shenzhen or wherever to like figure out, or Beijing, or to figure out like what's happening in those fulfillment centers.
Yeah. And you know, that's where perhaps missed opportunities could lie. But yeah, I think that was a plus having worked at CDW. Like we could see the warehouse of fulfillment centers and just really understand how things actually work, and just the organization as a whole and the infrastructure and just how like pieces and parts like kind of fit together. I literally had a conversation with a practitioner recently, and they were talking about systems thinking and how there's this push in our industry for systems thinking, but how like true systems thinking is just diluted by how companies have us as practitioners organized. And so, yeah, I think now for companies that like offshore their fulfillment and things like that, you're relying on folks in those places to kind of communicate and share how those things actually work. So your reliance is, not on your own education or observation, but through the lens of someone else.
Hmm. Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to mention too, which is, since we're on the topic of e-commerce and fulfillment, there was a differentiation that happened with Amazon, right? Because, we're all talking about, storefronts here, stores that existed, where Amazon started with books and, like a dedicated price to shipping, whereas before it was a various price. And then they hit a like $3.99, I think it was, or something like that, where every item was $3.99. So everyone's like, okay, reliable, trust signal, right? And eventually some genius, was like, let's offer free shipping, similar to Zappos, right? There was that free shipping model. This is where everybody went nuts. You pay a certain price a year, $99 a year, I think it was, you get Prime, right? And then Prime just took off. Once that kind of hit, people would pay like a certain amount and they knew shipping was free, even though I believe they would kind of add those prices into either it was like the seller would pay for it or it was like added to addition to the item. But somehow they made that model work. And that's when Amazon took off. So it is this like trust signal, right? These trust signals that I believe Wish fell on its flat on its face because they were taking their priced items. And then instead of building a better user experience, building a better fulfillment center, they were like looking for users. They were using that money for user retention, right? Or I'm sorry, user acquisition. And so I think that's where it's, that's where Amazon and, just the talented individuals that probably have MBAs, which we should get a little bit more. This is where I toot the horn of understanding business metrics from a user standpoint and then tying them back to UX metrics. This is where we could continue to have that seat at the table, not just from a UI perspective, but from a UX on how these numbers are based on user behavior. And so I think that to me was the huge marker for Amazon that kind of took them off. Now I think Wish, I honestly have not shopped on, I never shopped on Wish, but what I do remember from reading is that they were, at some point, I think egotistical in what they thought that they could accomplish. And instead of taking that revenue and, like we said, building on those pillars of the user experience and other avenues, they just, they took their money and used it elsewhere. And that's where they fell. I mean, pennies on it. I mean, truly, did you say pennies on the dollar? They sold for like next to nothing compared to what they were just 10 years ago. I mean, that wasn't like a long time ago.
On top of just to jump in on the trust issue, they also, France, apparently their anti-fraud agency analyzed 140 products and found 90% of their electronics, costume jewelry, and 45% of their toys were dangerous. So like when you add that in and you also like account to like, oh, you were buying products that were that could also like
Be
catch
toxic.
fire or
Yeah.
or be toxic, so
Yeah, good.
Yeah. And it just kind of, it makes me wonder, and again, just thinking about their business model as a whole, and this this urgency that they create, right? Like they have these dense pages. There's all these things like something's on sale, something is uh 21% off, whatever the case may be. When you look at companies, like that who sell like this, I wonder if they're really trying to build trust though. And I think that that's the
Fair
difference
point.
between like the Western commerce versus like some of these non-Western commerce sites that we see, where like Western commerce, like that is what we want. We're trying to build a brand loyalty. We're trying to um, build trust. We're trying to do that hook to keep people coming back. Whereas with these fast commerce places, it's about making the dollar, right? It's about the thrill of like getting lots for just a little. And so, are they truly trying to establish long term loyalty? Are they truly trying to build trust? Or are they just kind of marketing to this like price sensitive customer who really doesn't care? Like they'll use it because here's the thing, I don't think anybody's buying an Apple computer off of Wish.
Right.
Or and if you are buying electronics, to Brian's point, reading the statistics, like how reliable are these products going to be? If you like think about it, like are folks like really going there to buy top tier premium electronics, or are they trying to get away with getting something for nothing? And Brian, you kind of alluded to the whole like counterfeit thing earlier.
And there's the I think of I don't did you all ever go to BrandSmart USA? Do you know what BrandSmart USA was?
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay. So in the 90s, there would be a Best Buy, and you'd see the Best Buy, right? And you go walk into a Best Buy, and for younger people, Best Buy is an electronics shop that's still kind of hanging on by a thread, I think. But you'd go into a Best Buy, and it'd be very clean, and you'd see like car speaker stereos, stuff, and you'd see the prices, and you'd be like, "Oh, this is so expensive. I'm going to go to BrandSmart USA where there are deals." And you go into BrandSmart USA and it looked like shit. And you go into it, it's a giant, it looks painted like an American flag outside. And you'd walk into it and it looked like an empty warehouse where you would have speakers everywhere. And they had like neon colored signs that were just showing prices, but it was just screaming sale, 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 sale. So you would then psychologically start thinking, "Oh, I'm going to get a deal here." And like I wonder if like there's some of that going on where it's like you think it's that concept of like, "Oh, I'm it's like the dollar stores also do the same type of thing where people think that if they go to the dollar store they're going to get something cheaper, but that doesn't always tend to be the case."
They'll get something for $5 now, but they need a rebrand.
Right.
But to your
Um,
Eve, yeah, I wonder if they just didn't like if maybe failure was just kind of ingrained in the business model that they went forward with to begin with, and them just not knowing it. And the thing
Yeah.
is, if you're gonna go out with these sorts of products, or if you feel like your business model is just on impulse economy and getting people to just like buy at wholesale for cheap, with not necessarily like where it was more so quantity over quality. If you could do one thing right, because basically your products are, they're not going to be good products. If you could do one thing right, which is the fulfillment part, like how could you get that wrong?
yeah.
And it also makes me kind of wonder if somebody had the money to invest in this company to begin with and build up this infrastructure and inflate this evaluation, like it kind of makes you go, well, who made money off of this then? Like who made money off of like inflating up the evaluation, cashing out on the evaluation, and then like leaving and then it getting sold for pennies on the dollar.
Well, I mean, if I'm not that much of like a whiz when it comes to how the C-suite kind of comes in and out of our tech
Mhm.
companies, but I've been a part of several tech companies, and I'm sure you guys have too, where we like the revolving door of CEO
Oh yeah.
is like huge everywhere. I mean, I at one point I went through I think 5 CEOs, and I was only working at a company for like 2 years, 2.5 years. What happened? There is no accountability from a tech standpoint on what the CEO almost grants from like business objectives, and then what, and then the long-term, either suffering or benefits that come from it. And I believe what we need to do is reinstate that if you're going to be a CEO or part of the C-suite, you should be there for a certain number of years. And your decision making, you need to see that through, right? So you can see what you're doing to the company. Because this short-term, cheap way of, changing a couple things might look like, a bump in quarter 3, and then the following year the company's falling apart. I don't want to be a part of those types of companies. I don't want to sign up for that. I think what I see with Gen Z, and this is what I appreciate about Gen Z too. I appreciate a bunch of things about their generation, but one is, they just don't like participate. They're like, they will block you, they will disable the app, they will, figure out, like, I don't need this. Like, what I noticed, the number of accounts that I see that are disabled on my Instagram, of, followers or people I follow, are plenty. A lot of people have deactivated, and I think that people are taking notice. You can't just always just cheapen everything and keep things just like this short-term satisfaction. Like, we're sick of it too. And so I think, that attention economy, if we can connect that back to e-commerce, is alive and well, and we're still human beings at the end of the day, and we're not robots here. And so I think there's at least something to be said about how the evolution of a company, should have some accountability there as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. It would be I would be curious to just kind of follow um Wish through the years. Like I said, I don't know much about them outside of like where Wish was this thing. I thought they were somehow connected to Walmart. Maybe I'm thinking of something else, but maybe it's the earlier reference when they said
The CEO thought, he could outdo Walmart.
do Walmart. I think that's perhaps the reference between Wish and Walmart. But I think we've seen this with e-commerce down through the years, where e-commerce, certain sites or certain companies just kind of lost their way. And I know, Eve, you're like, we're all here in Chicago. And so you work for Sears. Sorry, Sears. But that was like a classic e-commerce example of like losing their way, where like Sears,
Totally.
like this catalog company, and it did this shift to e-commerce, but then it kind of lost sight of who it was and what it needed to do. And I'm just curious if, if Wish probably, if they've done the same thing, right? Just kind of lost sight, and rather than focus on so much on the sell, and just converting, they never necessarily probably built a loyalty base, probably never focused on like trust and reliability. And so when you kind of like lose sight of those things, or lose sight to like who you're trying to be in the commerce space, this is what could essentially happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the valuation, I think we could probably have a long conversation about how companies get valuated and who profits. That could be a whole nother, a whole nother conversation.
We should talk about VC money.
Yeah,
awesome.
probably, have a whole conversation about how that sham works. But yeah, somebody stood to profit. Profit for sure.
So we're coming up at about the top of the hour. I wanted to make sure, Carm, anything else, like just like overarching, that you wanted to just make sure that the audience here connects to. I think it's been really eye-opening, especially with like all of us kind of coming from different angles on e-commerce. But yeah, as like the user experience audience, most of them are user experience product or even like engineers or software developers. With their ears here, anything else you kind of wanted to add to the conversation?
When we think about 2026 and we think about commerce and where it's headed, I think what I would want or what I would challenge more so designers and I guess product folks and engineering folks like the triad and multi-factors, they can be thinking about these as well. But just thinking about like how the experiences are transforming and how we can actually keep up. But e-commerce used to be this like static thing, and it's not that anymore. And then now with the onset of AI, like how are we prepared to sort of shapeshift e-commerce? And I think we've got to keep up and get ahead as much as possible. And so I think that's a challenge that we're all feeling if we're still working in commerce.
That's
Beautiful.
well said. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this was great.
Thank
I
you
think
guys.
you'll have to come on in the future and talk more about Sears.
That's going to be a long conversation. We'll have to do a two-parter there. But with that, just for the audience, if you guys have any comments or questions, you can always email us at questions@uxmurdermystery.com.
All righty. Thank you guys.
Thanks for coming on. This was awesome.
Like, subscribe, and follow, or become our next victim of bad UX.
UX Murder Mystery is a joint production of Eve, User Experience Design Agency, and Crowley UX, where systems meet stories. It's hosted by Brian J. Crowley and Eve Eden. Edited by Kelsey Smith. Intro animation and logo design by Brian J. Crowley. Music is by Nicholas Lee. You can follow us at UX Murder Mystery. You can email us at questions@uxmurdermystery.com. UX Murder Mystery is a copyright 2025, Brian J. Crowley and Eve Eden. Thanks for listening.